What if the song that's been playing on repeat in your head, the one you hum in the shower, the one your kids sing along to without even thinking, the one that made you feel something the first time you heard it and you still can't quite explain what that feeling was? What if that song was designed with precision and deliberate purpose to pull you slowly, almost imperceptibly, away from God? Not by accident, not as a coincidence or an unintended side effect, but by design, by strategy, by a force that has been studying human psychology and spiritual vulnerability for longer than any of us have been alive. I know how that sounds. I do. And believe me, when this first crossed my heart, when I first started feeling the weight of what I'm about to share with you, my first instinct was to push it away, to rationalize it, to say, that's too much. That's the kind of thinking that makes people weird. That's fear dressed up as discernment. But then something happened, and I couldn't look away anymore. And I don't think you're going to be able to look away either. Because what I found, what I was shown, and I don't use that word lightly, wasn't buried in some obscure corner of the internet. It wasn't hidden behind layers of speculation and conjecture. It was out in the open, hiding in plain sight, in songs with billions of streams, in performances watched by hundreds of millions of people, in lyrics memorized by children who don't yet have the spiritual framework to understand what they're absorbing. And what it pointed to wasn't just about music. It was about something far older, far more intentional, and far more urgent than most of us have ever been willing to sit with. Stay with me. I know this is going to take some courage to hear, but I promise you, and I make very few promises when it comes to things like this, I promise you that by the time we reach the end of this conversation together, you will not just feel more informed. You will feel more awake. And what I'm about to share with you will completely change the way you hear music. And more than that, the way you understand the war that is being fought for your soul right now, today, in this very moment you're watching this. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that this is real. And this is for you. Let me take you back to a specific night. A night that for me was the beginning of all of this. I was sitting in my car, parked in a grocery store lot of all the unglamorous places, and I had just turned off the radio. There had been a song playing, a massive, inescapable song. One of the most streamed songs in the world at that moment, billions of plays. You almost certainly know it. If I hummed the melody, you'd recognize it instantly. It was the kind of song that was genuinely everywhere, in coffee shops, in pharmacies, coming through the open windows of cars at stoplights, playing in the background of video clips your friends send you. And I remember sitting there in the sudden quiet after turning it off, and I felt this strange, uncomfortable weight settling in my chest. Not sadness exactly. Not conviction in the traditional sense. More like a wrongness, the specific particular feeling of having let something in through an unlocked window that you didn't mean to let in, like a cold draft from a direction you didn't expect. And I sat with that feeling for a moment, and I said almost out loud, Lord, what was that? What followed I can only describe as an opening, like a door swinging wide in my understanding, not an audible voice, not a vision, but a clarity, immediate, clean, undeniable. And the sense that was pressed upon my heart was simply this: look closer. So I did. I went home, and I started looking, not with a suspicious or conspiratorial mindset, not trying to find demons in everything or confirm something I had already decided to believe, but just open, genuinely willing, asking God to show me what He wanted me to see rather than what I was comfortable with. And what I found over the following weeks and months shook me in ways I had not anticipated. Not because the information was hidden, but because it was so obvious once I was willing to look at it honestly that I couldn't understand how I had missed it for so long. How we have all been missing it. There is a war happening for human consciousness, for human worship, for the orienting direction of human souls. And music, that sacred, ancient, God-breathed, irreplaceable gift, is one of the primary battlegrounds of that war. Not one of several. One of the most significant ones. Now, before I go further, I need to be honest with you about where I'm standing when I say all of this, because I don't want you to hear this as coming from a place of judgment or fear or cultural anxiety. I love music with everything in me. Always have. Music has carried me through some of the darkest and most disorienting seasons of my life. I have wept to music. I have felt the presence of God in ways that words alone couldn't reach because of music. I have found my way back to hope through a melody when theology alone wasn't enough for what I was carrying at the time. So this is not about demonizing an art form that God Himself invented. This is about awareness. This is about discernment. This is about waking up to something that is already happening, whether we acknowledge it or not. Because the enemy has always known something about music that we sometimes take for granted, that music bypasses the intellect and goes straight to the soul. Think about what that actually means. A melody can reduce a composed, rational adult to tears in 30 seconds. A beat can move your body before your conscious mind has even registered what song is playing. A lyric, and this is the part that should make us all stop. A lyric can plant itself so deep in your subconscious that you are still singing it 30 years later without being able to explain how you learned it, without remembering where you first heard it, without ever consciously choosing to memorize it. It just went in. Music doesn't knock on the door of your heart and ask permission. It doesn't wait for an invitation. It walks right in and sits down and makes itself at home in the rooms you didn't even know were empty. And if that is true, if music is that powerful, that intimate, that deeply and permanently woven into the fabric of human spiritual experience, then doesn't it follow, logically and spiritually, that the enemy would want to weaponize it? That he would understand its power better than almost any of us and would devote significant intentional effort to corrupting and redirecting it toward his own purposes? I believe the answer is yes. I believe it with everything in me. And the evidence, once you start looking, is not thin. And here is what I'm about to share with you that will completely change the way you see this. The hidden message in much of today's music is not always in the backward masking or the coded symbols or the hidden imagery, though some of that is real. The deepest hidden message is in what the music is quietly, consistently designed to make you feel about yourself and about God. And that is far more powerful and far more dangerous than any hidden lyric played in reverse. Let me go somewhere in scripture with you, because everything I'm saying has roots that go deeper than cultural observation. The spiritual foundation for this is ancient, biblical, and when you really sit with it, devastating in its implications. Ezekiel 28:13. This is one of those verses that the more you sit with it, the more it opens up beneath you. God is speaking about the being who became Satan, and he says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created." Timbrels and pipes, musical instruments, built into the very structure of Lucifer's created being, not acquired later as a skill or talent, not a gift he earned or developed, prepared for him. On the day he was created, part of his original design. Many theologians and biblical scholars across centuries of Christian thought have understood this passage to mean that before his catastrophic rebellion and fall, Lucifer was intimately, perhaps even uniquely, connected to music in the heavenly realm. Some have interpreted this to suggest he led worship in the presence of God, that his very nature was constructed to generate and channel glorious sound upward toward the throne of the Most High. And then he fell and chose darkness over the light he had been made to carry. And here is the part that changed something fundamental in my understanding when I finally grasped it. He didn't lose the gift when he fell. He corrupted it. He took something that was created to point all of creation toward God, something breathtaking in its beauty and original power, and he turned it into a weapon aimed in exactly the opposite direction. He took the extraordinary capacity of music to open the human soul, that beautiful, vulnerable, yearning openness that happens when music does what it was made to do, and he figured out how to use that openness as a doorway, not to the divine, but to something that wears the divine's clothing, not toward the presence of God, but toward a counterfeit that feels close enough to the real thing that people can spend years consuming it and never realize what they've actually been receiving. This is not a modern theory. The church fathers wrote about it. Augustine wrestled with it at length in his Confessions, genuinely torn between his love of music and his concern about its capacity to move him in ways that weren't always toward God. The early desert monastics warned about it. Medieval Christian thinkers devoted serious theological energy to understanding the spiritual dimensions of music and what made some music holy and other music corrupting. And in the secular world, philosophers, historians, sociologists, and neuroscientists across the modern era have documented that music has a power to alter human behavior, belief, mood, and spiritual orientation in ways that rational argument cannot match. We know this. Some part of us has always known this. We just don't always act as though we know it. Now I want to get specific, because general warnings are easy to absorb and easy to forget. I want to walk you through the actual mechanics of what I found, the actual pattern that appears again and again across decades and genres in the music that has reached the widest global audiences and planted itself most deeply in the consciousness of this generation. The pattern works like this. Take a song with an irresistible musical hook, a melody or beat so skillfully constructed that it creates something close to a physical pull in your body before you've had a chance to think about it. Make it emotionally resonant. Connect it to a universal human experience, longing, liberation, love, the desire to be truly known and accepted. Give it a production quality that lifts it above everything else playing around it. Make it feel like a moment, like something important is happening when it plays, and then, buried in the lyrics, embedded in the imagery of the music video, woven into the symbolism of the live performance, plant seeds, not crude, obvious seeds that people would reject. Subtle seeds, seeds of a particular and consistent message. You are your own highest authority. Your desire is sacred. There is no throne above your own heart. The only truth that matters is whatever feels true to you in this moment. That is the message, repeated in 1,000 different melodic and emotional packages. And it lands not as a theological argument, which we might engage critically, but as a feeling, as an atmosphere, as something that seems to be simply true because it arrived through music rather than through words. I went through the lyrics of some of the most streamed songs of the last 15 years, and the patterns I found were not subtle once I was looking. Songs in which the narrator explicitly celebrates the surrender to darkness as a form of freedom. Songs where the figure of the devil is cast as liberating and God as imprisoning, which is a precise, deliberate inversion of the gospel. Songs where the chorus, the most repeated and most deeply memorized part, contains a direct reversal of a biblical principle. Songs where the emotional peak, the bridge, the breakdown, the moment of maximum emotional impact, carries the implicit message that God is absent, uncaring, unreliable, or a myth invented by people who couldn't handle their freedom. And here is what cannot be dismissed as coincidence. These are not obscure songs. They are not underground or niche. They are the biggest songs in the world, playing in your child's earphones on the school bus, coming through the speakers at family restaurants, soundtracking weddings and funerals and first days of school and broken hearts. Songs that are so culturally embedded that to question them feels almost socially dangerous. And we have listened to them so many times, on so many devices, in so many contexts, that we have stopped registering what's actually being said. The lyrics stopped being statements and became atmosphere, became the sonic wallpaper of our lives. And that is exactly how they do what they do. Not through confrontation, through saturation. Let me pause here and address something directly, because I can feel it. Some of you are feeling resistant right now, maybe frustrated, maybe thinking this feels like an overreach into territory that is really just personal preference dressed up as spiritual warfare. Maybe thinking of a song you love and feeling defensive on its behalf. I understand that completely. I have been there. These are songs with memories attached to them. Songs that are woven into the story of your life. Being asked to look at them differently can feel like being asked to distrust your own experience. But let me ask you something, and I want you to hold it honestly. If someone handed you a glass of water that was 95% pure and 5% something harmful, if it tasted exactly like regular water, and if the harmful part was completely invisible, would you drink it? Because the experience felt normal? Because everyone around you was drinking from the same glass? The most effective deceptions never come in shapes we recognize as dangerous. If they did, they wouldn't work as deceptions. They come wrapped in beauty, in melody, in the kind of emotional resonance that we instinctively trust because music has always been the language of what is most true to us. They come through things that feel liberating, that feel honest, that feel like they're speaking the truth nobody else will say. Jesus said this plainly in John 10:10, and I want you to hear it not as a familiar verse, but as a word spoken with urgency directly into this moment. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. The thief comes only to steal, not clumsily, not obviously. The skilled thief works with such precision and grace that you feel nothing at the moment of theft. You go on with your day, perfectly convinced that everything is fine. It isn't until later, sometimes much later, when you reach for something you expected to find and discover it gone, that you realize what happened and what is being stolen. Not just your attention or your time, though those are real losses. What is being stolen is your sense of the sacred, your sense that there is something and someone above you that is worthy of your reverence and your surrender and your worship, your sense that your life has meaning and direction beyond the satisfaction of your own desire. Your sense that the God of the Bible is real and present and actively involved in your story and worthy of your trust. Your sense that you were made for something more than this world offers. That is what is being stolen. Song by song, play by play, lyric by lyric. In the aggregate of 10,000 hours of background music that you didn't consciously choose to absorb. And I felt Jesus showing me this, not with anger, not with condemnation, but with the urgency of a father whose children are walking toward an edge they cannot see in the dark. He is not furious. He is reaching. He is saying, look, I need you to see this. Here is the pattern interrupt. The thing I found that I absolutely could not dismiss as coincidence or projection. Multiple major artists across several decades have given interviews, public, recorded, verifiable, not obscure, in which they describe their creative process and their relationship with their artistry in explicitly non-Christian spiritual language. Not vague references to inspiration, specific descriptions of entities, of presences, of feeling that they were channeling something external through their performance. Some described specific moments, transactions, rituals, decisions that preceded their rise to prominence. Some described experiences during live performances that they could only characterize as possession. Some described a price they felt they had paid that they could not fully name but could absolutely feel. I am not drawing your conclusion for you. I'm telling you it is there, that it is in their own words. And I'm asking you to hold it alongside what Scripture tells us about the reality of spiritual forces, about the nature of the enemy's strategies, about the ways that darkness offers what appears to be gift and power and success in exchange for allegiance and access. Because if any part of that is real, and I believe it is, then the music that came out of those creative relationships is carrying something that travels invisibly but lands with real spiritual weight in the souls of everyone who listens. And what I'm about to tell you now will completely change the way you think about whose company your soul is actually keeping when you put in your earphones. There is something else I need to share with you here. Something that took me weeks to accept because it felt too strange, too dramatic, too much like the kind of thing that gets mocked in polite conversation. But I cannot leave it out. In the world of audio engineering and music production, there is a documented practice, not theoretical, not speculative, but documented and in some cases openly discussed, of the intentional use of specific audio frequencies to create particular psychological and physiological states in listeners. This is not supernatural claim. It is neuroscience. Different frequencies produce measurably different responses in the human brain and nervous system. Some frequencies create states of alertness and elevation. Others create states of anxiety, agitation, or emotional dysregulation. And there are those within certain parts of the music industry who have been open about the intentional application of this knowledge, not to help their listeners, but to keep them in a state of emotional dependency, to keep them coming back, not because the music is feeding them, but because it has created a hunger that only more of itself can temporarily satisfy. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because what I'm describing is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a technique, a deliberate engineering of your emotional state without your knowledge or consent. And when you combine that with the spiritual realities I've been describing, with the intentionality behind the lyrical content, with the spiritual alignments of some of the people creating this music, what you get is something that should make every thoughtful, spiritually aware person stop and ask serious questions about what they are actually receiving when they press play. The Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians 6:12, a verse that many of us quote but perhaps don't always apply to every corner of our lives. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Not flesh and blood, spiritual forces. And those spiritual forces are not limited to the obviously dark or sinister. They operate through the ordinary, through the everyday, through the things we consume and absorb without a second thought, because they come wrapped in entertainment and culture and the things everyone around us is enjoying. I want to be very careful here about something. I am not condemning these artists as people. Full stop. Many of them are deeply wounded human beings who were caught in something they may not have fully understood when they stepped into it. Many have described experiences of darkness, addiction, confusion, and spiritual torment that are heartbreaking to read. They are not the enemy. They are human beings trapped in the enemy's snare. And they need prayer, not judgment. Earnest prayer. Because what was done to them and through them is a tragedy, not a cause for condemnation. But what the music carries, what it opens in the people who receive it, that is a different question. and it is a question worth taking seriously. And you? What do you feel when you think about this? Sitting with it honestly right now. What comes up? What songs are going through your mind? What feelings are rising? I would genuinely love to hear from you. Write it in the comments below, your honest reaction, your questions, what this is bringing up in you. Because I mean this. This is not a lecture I'm delivering from a position of certainty. This is a conversation among people walking the same road. And your experience of this matters. Now let me turn a corner. Because I made you a promise at the start of this, and I intend to keep it. I promised that this would not only be about what to fear or what to avoid. I promised you the full story. And the full story, the part that has carried me through all of this without falling into fear or despair, is what God has given us in response. Here is the truth that anchors everything. If the enemy has spent millennia pouring strategy and effort and intelligence into corrupting music, it is because music is extraordinarily powerful. The enemy does not waste sophisticated strategy on things that don't matter. He does not corrupt gifts that have no real force. He goes after the things that carry the highest potential for connecting human souls to the living God. Which means music, real music. Music saturated with the Spirit of God, music that carries genuine surrender and genuine worship, is among the most powerful spiritual tools available to any human being in any era. And that is extraordinary news. When David played his harp and the evil spirit tormenting Saul fled, that happened. When Paul and Silas, beaten and shackled in a Roman prison at midnight, began to sing hymns and the entire prison shook and every chain fell free, that happened. When Jehoshaphat sent the worshippers to the front of the army and the enemies of Israel destroyed each other before a single Israelite soldier drew a weapon, that happened. These are not inspiring metaphors. These are historical biblical accounts of music functioning as a weapon of real and decisive spiritual power. Worship is warfare. This is not a poetic statement. This is a literal spiritual reality. Genuine worship, honest and surrendered praise directed at the living God, creates an atmosphere in which the enemy literally cannot maintain his foothold. It calls the presence of heaven into your circumstances. It breaks things that strategy and willpower and argument cannot break. It opens things that human effort cannot open. And that is precisely why the enemy has invested so heavily in corrupting it, because he understands its power with a clarity that most of us haven't yet reached. Let me tell you what happened to me during a season of personal difficulty. I won't describe it in full detail because some of it is still tender and some of it is still between me and God. But during this season, I made a decision that felt almost embarrassingly simple. I removed all secular music from my daily life for 30 days. Not as a permanent thing, not as a rule I was imposing on myself from the outside. Just 30 days of filling that space with worship instead. The first few days were genuinely disorienting. I hadn't realized how much noise I had been using as insulation against silence, against the kind of quiet where God tends to show up and ask honest questions that you've been able to avoid because there was always something playing, something in the background. Some noise to fill the gap between you and the questions you weren't ready to answer. I felt the absence of the familiar sound more than I expected to, more than felt comfortable. And that itself told me something important about how much I had been leaning on it and what I had been using it to avoid. In that first week, what I encountered most was not peace. It was noise of a different kind, the internal kind. The thoughts and feelings and unprocessed things that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface of all that music. And I had to sit with them. I had to bring them to God instead of drowning them in melody. And that was uncomfortable in the way that honesty is always uncomfortable before it becomes freeing. But by the second week, something in my inner atmosphere began to shift. Gradually at first, and then in ways I couldn't ignore. I started waking up with a quality of stillness that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel empty but full, the kind that feels like presence rather than absence. I started moving through my days with more capacity, more patience, more genuine attention to the people in front of me, more awareness of what God was doing in the ordinary moments that I had been rushing through too quickly to see. My prayers changed. They became less effortful and more natural, less like a discipline I was maintaining and more like a conversation I was having with someone who was genuinely and continuously present. And I started noticing beauty again. That sounds small, but it wasn't. I had stopped noticing ordinary beauty without being aware that I had stopped. The particular quality of light on a morning that's almost too perfect. The sound of my children's laughter as something to receive and be grateful for rather than background noise to process while doing something else. The feeling of having been actually present in a day rather than merely having passed through it. I believe what happened was that I had been living with a kind of spiritual static so constant and so normalized that I had completely lost the ability to recognize it as static. It was just the sound of my life. And when I removed it and filled that space with worship, genuine worship, music that was pointing upward, music that was asking nothing of me except that I turn my face toward God, something in me recalibrated in ways I hadn't thought to ask for. Now, here is the practical invitation I want to leave with you, because faith without action is just information, and I don't want to leave you with information alone. I want to leave you with something that changes something. For 1 week, just 1 week, try bringing your music choices into conscious prayer. Before you press play on something, take a single quiet breath and ask honestly, Lord, is this going to open me toward you or pull me further from you? Trust what comes. Not with anxiety, not with a spirit of suspicion, just with quiet willingness to listen to the answer and respond to it honestly. And in that same week, fill your space with worship, more than you have been. In your car, in your kitchen in the mornings, in the quiet before you sleep. Let the sound that saturates your daily life begin to be sound that is pointing upward. Notice what happens to your thoughts. Notice what happens to your prayers. Notice what happens to your capacity for peace and for love. I genuinely believe you will be surprised. Because here is the thing about the original music, the music that the enemy tried to steal and corrupt and redirect. It is still here. It never left. The great hymns that have carried generations through darkness and doubt and loss, still here. The contemporary worship songs in which you can feel the genuine presence of God pressing through the melody, still here. The private moments of wordless humming that become prayer before you even realize it's happening, still here. The music of heaven that John heard in his vision, still playing, still moving, still available to any soul that turns toward it. Philippians 4:8 tells us what to dwell in. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Think about such things. Let such things form the atmosphere of your inner life, not because you're afraid of the alternative, but because you have tasted the difference and you know which one is feeding you and which one is quietly taking something from you. Let me bring this home. All the way home, Jesus knew about all of this. He knows now.